Hopefully you can see the screen there now. So as I say, we're going to look at fungal attack. So we'll make a start here. So there's two main categories basically. You have wet rot and dry rot. So fungal attack is basically when wood starts to rot. I'm sure you've all heard of wood rotting before. There's basically two types. One's wet and one's dry. Alright. The conditions that are needed for fungal attack: a food source, so that's an obvious one. That's obviously the wood. Oxygen, which there should be pretty much everywhere. Stagnant air. Okay, so that's kind of a closed space where the air's it doesn't smell great. Okay, it's not fresh. Moisture content below or above 20%. Heat. Okay, so they are sorry, I went past them. So they're the kind of 5 main things that are needed, or conditions that are needed for fungal attack. Okay, so you have a food source, which is the wood. Oxygen. Stagnant air, which is basically air that's not fresh. It's musty, as they call it. Moisture content above 20%, and heat. Okay. So we look at dry rot first. So dry rot, as you can imagine, is whenever the wood's actually dry. Okay. So it's often known as brown rot. Okay. It obviously occurs indoors. So guys, if we use our brains here, dry rot has to occur inside, because if it's outside, it's not going to be dry, is it? It's going to be wet. Okay. So dry rot occurs inside. It's identifiable by rectangular cracks, so you can basically see the cracks in the wood here. Okay. And it severely weakens the strength of the wood, as you would imagine. And then you have wet rot. Wet rot generally occurs outdoors. Okay, guys, so this is kind of common sense. Examples would be fence posts, gates, doors, etc. So anything that's outside or exposed to the elements, which would be the wind and rain, can start to rot. All right. It doesn't produce fruit bodies, so this is a little bit scientific. You probably look at it in science. Okay, but it doesn't produce fruit bodies, and the affected wood is moist and feels kind of spongy. Okay, so if you actually touched wood that was rotten with wet rot or white rot, it would be very, very soft and spongy and wet. Okay. Preservatives to help kind of treat this. So preservatives are used to extend the lifespan of the wood. Okay, it helps to protect the wood from decay. Timber in an outdoor setting, so any wood that's outside, such as your garden fences, needs to be protected from the weather, insect, and fungal attack. Okay, so some examples here, you can see one came up already, is the tar oil preservative. You also have waterborne preservatives, solvent-based preservatives. Okay, so we're just going to look at them very quickly, guys. There is a whole new chapter on preservatives, which we'll do some other time. Okay, so in terms of tar oil is used to treat fence posts, telephone poles, railway sleepers. So that's when old train tracks were made out of wood. And kerosene is commonly used. So basically, guys, tar oil it actually looks like tar. It's black stuff. So if you see any ESB poles or telephone poles up, they're all, you know how they're kind of a dark kind of brown color. They're all covered in tar oil. Okay. The advantages of tar oil is it's very cheap. It penetrates into the wood. Okay, so it soaks into the wood. It's very toxic to insects and fungi, so that's why it's good at preventing any insect or fungi attack. Disadvantages: there's a strong smell of it. It's like just tar at the end of the day. It's not suitable for indoor use because of the smell, and it's toxic. It cannot be painted over until it becomes really, really well weathered. And then finally, it bleeds in hot water or in hot weather. So basically, if you ever see the road, you know, if it's really, really warm in the summertime, sometimes you can see the tar on the road actually melting in places. It's the same idea here. It bleeds in hot weather. That just means it kind of remelts. Okay, so with heat, it kind of remelts. Then the waterborne preservative, guys, are like toxic salts. They dissolve in water, as you can imagine, it's waterborne. So it's mixed in water. As the water evaporates, the chemicals remain and they protect the wood. Okay, so it's basically chemicals or toxics that are mixed with water. Once the water evaporates, in other words, it dries, the toxics or the salts are kind of left behind and they basically cover and protect the wood. The advantage of this is it doesn't bleed. In other words, it doesn't melt. It's usually colourless and odourless, so you can't see it and you can't smell it, which is good, and suitable for painting afterwards, so you could paint over it. Disadvantages: the salts can be washed out of the wood. Okay, if it was used outside and it was very kind of wet weather. So obviously this will be something that would be used inside more. It doesn't protect against weather, as I said, and it can cause swelling or distortion. Okay, in the timber, which isn't great either. And the next one, then the final one there, was the solvent based. Okay, so solvent based is kind of our traditional one. It's a chemical solvent which allows the preservative to soak into the timber. The preservative is then left in the timber when the solvent evaporates. Okay, white spirit is commonly used. So I don't know if you've ever heard of white spirits, guys. Okay, so it's a clear kind of liquid and it's mixed in with a lot of paint. Okay, so a lot of paints are kind of oil based. Okay, solvent based would be an oil based paint. Okay, so instead of using water with the chemicals or the salts, it would be, or the colors, it would be it'll be a kind of solvent based thing, usually white spirits. Okay, the advantages of this is it's suitable for painting, so you can paint over it. It penetrates into the timber, so it soaks nicely into the timber to protect it, and it's suitable for both indoor and outdoor use, which is good. There's a very strong smell of it because of the preservative or the chemical, the white spirits. It's obviously more expensive. White spirits is more expensive than water, as you can imagine. Very briefly, we'll look over at applying the preservative. So there's a couple of different ways. Obviously, your brush, etc. But one of the most common things nowadays is to use a pressure treater. Okay, so it's like a little chamber here, and basically the wood is placed into the chamber, creates a vacuum. Okay, to remove the water and the moisture from the wood. The preservative then is they pump it into the kind of chamber here, this blue chamber, and basically the wood soaks it up. Okay, so it's very effective, but it's actually very expensive as well. So you can imagine the wood all goes into this. It's like a big barrel. All the wood goes in after it's dried out, and then they pressure treat it. Okay. Other ways is immersion or dipping. So the wood is dipped into a big bath. So it's just like whenever you go for a bath, it's just like dipping the timber into a big bath of preservative. That's called immersion. And then you have your traditional kind of brushing or spraying. So you can use your brush or a spray gun. So a spray gun or a brush can be used to apply preservative. The preservative does not soak that deeply into the wood. So whenever you paint it, it kind of sits on the surface. Okay, regular coats are required to maintain protection. Alright, so whenever you paint a board, obviously the paint kind of sits on the outside and dries. Okay, and guys, that's the end of the chapter.